Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisui-Q. Coming up, Cook Islands Prime Minister due to finalise a deal with China. Also,
it's when you kind of see this push or leaning more towards independence really come through from the Cook Islands. They've always had those aspirations.
What do experts make of the spat between New Zealand and the Pacific? And
the professional league is the piece missing in football in Oceania. We are the only confederation without professional football.
Oceania football looks to redefine the sport in the region. Cook Islanders are bracing for potential backlash from a controversial partnership deal with China, which is expected to be finalised any moment now. The agreement has angered the New Zealand government, which says it was not consulted as required under their special constitutional arrangement. Prime Minister Mark Brown has been in Beijing for the past few days to confirm the agreement, while our reporter Caleb Fotheringham is on the ground in the Cook Islands. Kia ora, Caleb. When is Mark Brown expected to return to the Cooks?
Kia ora, Sana. It's a little bit unknown. Mark Brown leaves China on Friday. I believe that is Beijing time. So it could be any time from Friday, Cook Islands time, to Sunday. He has Parliament on Monday, so he has to be there. It's been a little bit funny that we haven't actually found this out yet. There's been a bit of unknown with people even on the ground. So hopefully we clear that up soon. As for the signed document, that could be any time from now, really. But I did speak to someone on the ground here in the Cook Islands, and they feel like it's probably going to be towards the tail end of this week. So Mark Brown will do his Beijing trip. He'll see all the people that he needs to see. They'll talk about the agreement. If they have any disagreements or want to tweak it a little bit, they can do that together. And then at the very end, they can sign the document.
Yeah, who else have you spoken to on the ground in the Cooks about this deal? What are they saying?
Well, I've just spoken to everyday people, really, and a cultural leader as well. But the overall feeling is that people are quite surprised. They are surprised that this has had so much international recognition, keeping in mind that Rarotonga and the Cook Islands are quite small. But there is concern around transparency from some of the people that I've talked to. But that transparency extends from how transparent Mark Brown has been with the Cook Islands people, not so much how transparent Cook Islands has been with New Zealand. Now, that's obviously been the big concern for New Zealand, that second part, how transparent Cook Islands has been with New Zealand. And New Zealand feels like that the Cook Islands has broken its constitutional relationship with New Zealand, and that New Zealand had the right to see the full agreement that Mark Brown is going to be signed. And Mark Brown has confirmed they didn't give that to New Zealand, and he believes that it was not necessary. And people hold a similar opinion to Mark Brown. They think that, New Zealand doesn't need to see it. One person even called Winston Peters a bully and thought that the Cook Islands doesn't need to be monitored as closely as it should, and believes it goes back to this colonial way of thinking.
So is this unusual for the Cook Islands to sign a deal with China?
China has actually been really involved with the Cook Islands. They're the third largest development partner of the country. The courthouse was built by China, the police station as well. There was a big water project that China was involved in as well. So this has been going on since the 90s. So it's not totally unusual for the Cook Islands to have relations with China. We spoke to an international relations expert, Yati, and he says the Cook Islands has become more and more involved in handling its own foreign relations over the last 20 years. So throughout that whole relationship with China, this is when they've been almost the most independent with their foreign affairs relations. And he says New Zealand shouldn't become unhinged over this spat. What has made this such a big deal, in my opinion, is that New Zealand has said that this is breaking the constitutional agreement, and this is why it's become such a big deal.
Diplomatic rows have emerged in recent weeks between New Zealand and its Pacific neighbours. New Zealand's Foreign Affairs Office said Winston Peters has made repeated attempts for the government of the Cook Islands to share details of the proposed agreement with China, which they have not done. In addition, New Zealand has put Kiribasa's aid under review as a result of a cancelled meeting, and a Samoan village has sought help from China following the sinking of the HMS Manawanui. I spoke to geopolitics expert Geoffrey Miller and began to ask for his take on the spat between New Zealand and the Cook Islands.
Well, I think it's all rather unedifying. It's quite unseemly the way that this has all come out into the public view. As much as I find it interesting as an observer to see all the sausages and how they're being made, but it's not usual that you get some of the statements that have come out of Winston Peters' office in the past few days. One saying that the Cook Islands and New Zealand are not seeing eye to eye, listing the grievances. Saying that the Cook Islands have improperly consulted with New Zealand. It's very rare in diplomacy that you get these kinds of statements, particularly between countries that really are meant to be the closest of friends, and that's very much the case for the Cook Islands and New Zealand. Remember, their people both share the same New Zealand passport, so it has been quite a surprise, quite puzzling to me the way that this has broken out into the open.
You brought up consulting, so I'm just wondering, why does the Cook Islands have to consult with New Zealand on foreign matters when the 2001 declaration also states that they're a sovereign and independent state?
Exactly. The 2001 declaration is very contradictory, and I encourage listeners to go and look at that declaration. It's quite a straightforward document. It's not difficult to read. But if you go and look at it in Clause 4, it does say straight off that the Cook Islands interacts with the international community as a sovereign and independent state. Now, that's Clause 4 on foreign affairs. Later on, it does say that the signatories undertake to consult regularly on foreign affairs matters with a view to formulating common policies on important foreign affairs issues. But that's pretty much as specific as it gets. There is even another clause, Clause 5 on treaties, which says expressly that the government of the Cook Islands possesses the capacity to enter into treaties and other international agreements in its own right with governments. And that's exactly what Mark Brown is doing here with the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership with China. So in the end, you can perhaps put some of the blame at successive New Zealand governments. I don't know why you would sign up to a document like that that has just got such contradictory elements. I guess at the time in 2001, it was a very different time. It was a very different era. China was interested in the Pacific at that time, but it was a very new interest and it was at a very low level compared with today. And perhaps New Zealand at the time thought, well, the Cook Islands don't really have any options. This is simply a document we're doing. It looks good. We want them to be more independent because we want them to take more responsibility for themselves. So we'll put that in their sovereign and independent state. But I think New Zealand is finding out now that words do have meaning, and Mark Brown can rightly point to that document and say, well, what are you complaining about here? we're acting as a sovereign and independent state here.
Would you say then that it's time to review the 2001 declaration?
There may be an argument for that, but I think then New Zealand would have to tread very carefully. I think New Zealand has a lot to think about at this point because there's a real risk in coming in and being quite heavy-handed with the Cook Islands on this issue and saying what you can't do and what you can do. And it comes across as quite paternalistic. It comes across as quite colonial. And I don't think it's helpful. And it's quite contradictory to the way that New Zealand actually has acted over the past year. If you remember, in 2024, Winston Peters, the foreign minister, made quite a play of visiting every member or almost every member of the Pacific Islands Forum. And he emphasized at every stop the Pacific family. New Zealand is a good neighbor. He gave out small amounts of aid pretty much on every stop for development projects, cooperation, climate change projects, resilience plans of all kinds, a new weather radar for Tonga, for example. I mean, there were all kinds of projects last year that were announced, and it was very much a good cop strategy. And I thought it was very effective. But this year has been quite a turnaround with what we've seen with both Kiribati and now the Cook Islands. It's almost like there's been a change in strategy here, and Winston Peters has got the big stick out. And I don't know why you would suddenly change tack like that, I don't think it's going to win New Zealand a lot of friends.
Do you think the public are overreacting to the deal that Mark Brown will sign with Beijing? There hasn't been much details as to what would be in this agreement, so why the concern?
Well, I think we do need to wait and see what this agreement has in it. I think perhaps where the public interest has come is just these quite extraordinary statements coming out of Winston Peters' office. I mean, they do make you sit up and read them. Normally, diplomatic statements, look, they're quite dull, and they're very, very much orchestrated. They're pre-written. These statements are not like that. These statements are very strong, and I think that's perhaps what the public are reacting to. These statements saying the Cook Islands and New Zealand are not seeing eye to eye on these issues, saying that the Cook Islands have improperly consulted, openly expressing a great amount of displeasure. This is not something that you would normally expect between New Zealand and any of the Pacific states at the moment, really. So it's been quite surprising, and yeah, I think that's where a lot of the public interest has come from. And of course, it does fit into this bigger picture of geopolitical competition in the Indo-Pacific, and there's a lot of interest now in this issue. China is interested in the Pacific. Western countries are also more interested in the Pacific as a result because they see China taking a stronger interest. So it fits into this overall narrative, I guess, and this is what is driving the interest in what's happening at the moment.
Now, earlier you mentioned that Winston made the effort to visit most of the Pacific Island Forum member countries, but now we've seen that he's put Kiribati aid under review, and there's also been reports of a village in Samoa. They've been seeking assistance from China to help with the Manawanui cleanup. Would you say that New Zealand's relationship with the Pacific is in jeopardy, or is that still early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. I think it's still early days here. I'm not sure I'd go that far to say that it's in jeopardy. New Zealand's relations with the Pacific are in jeopardy overall. But there are real questions to be asked of New Zealand's Foreign Minister. What is driving this change in strategy here? Why would you undermine all the good work, as you would see it from his perspective, that has been done over the last year, all the travel, all the goodwill that has been built up? I don't know why you would undermine that now. And certainly the reaction to what happened with Kiribati seemed so over the top. And you almost wonder, was there more to it below the surface? Or was it an overreaction? It seemed to me like an overreaction. In the end, yes, the meeting had been scheduled with the president. It couldn't happen. I mean, that can happen in diplomacy. I'm sure that Winston Peters has been stood up by other foreign ministers and leaders in the past in bigger countries. Perhaps it's the fact that Kiribati is smaller and New Zealand's the bigger partner, and the Kiribati is meant to jump when Mr. Peters asks for it. I don't know, but it seemed like a pretty harsh punishment to then put the aid program under review, almost as if you're going to punish the people of Kiribati for the decisions or the scheduling issues of the president. It seemed over the top to me, and the Australian Deputy Prime Minister had gone before that visit that was scheduled for Winston Peters and had accepted a meeting with the Vice President. It had gone well by all accounts. So I don't know what really drove Mr. Peters' reaction on that. But combining that issue with those issues, the other issues that you mentioned, obviously with the Cook Islands and Samoa, yeah, it's not a good start to 2025 for New Zealand in the Pacific. If you're looking at that positive strategy, that Pacific family strategy that New Zealand had tried over the past year, that seemed to actually be working, and this seems to now be undermining that strategy.
An international relations specialist at Victoria University of Wellington, Dr. Yati, says New Zealand needs to ensure it doesn't become unhinged over the spat with the Cook Islands. China and the Cook Islands are signing what has been dubbed a comprehensive strategic partnership, with Wellington saying it should have been made aware of the details beforehand. The Cook Island Prime Minister, Mark Brown, is promising there is nothing in the agreement that would worry New Zealand, but this country's Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, has voiced his anger at not being put in the picture. Don Wiseman spoke to Dr. Yatsi Yatsi about the issues thrown up by the spat.
Is the Cook Islands at fault in not letting the New Zealand government know what was in the deal with China before it signed the deal with China?
If you weigh both sides of the explanations up, I think the Cook Islands has a better case than us. The agreement really is about consultation, but not about the extent of the consultation. So that's where the grey area is. And obviously, Prime Minister Brown had contacted through a phone call to Winston Peters. From a Cook Islands perspective, that was sufficient. From New Zealand's perspective, it seems like they want all the cards on the table, which for an independent country like Cook Islands is probably unreasonable. So I think on balance, the Cook Islands probably has a better case.
The realm countries being able to get more involved in their own foreign relations has been something that's been just slowly developing over the last 20 years, in my experience. And it must presumably get to a point where they assume complete control over their foreign relations. They have been encouraged, both Niue and the Cook Islands, been encouraged to seek donor assistance from other places, including in the case of the Cook Islands from China by New Zealand. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, look, if you go back to the 2001 Joint Centenary Declaration, that's when you kind of see this push or leaning more towards independence really come through from the Cook Islands. They've always had those aspirations, but it was made even more clear in that declaration. And from a New Zealand perspective, they were a little bit hesitant, and you can see that in some of the wording in the declaration, but at the same time understood the Cook Islands' sort of general push towards independence. Now, from a New Zealand perspective, it's actually quite good for New Zealand if the Cook Islands were able to stand on their own 2 feet, which is, I think, what Prime Minister Brown is aiming at. Because obviously it would lessen the amount of aid that New Zealand gives, and it would see another quite resilient and developed country in the region that has strong ties to New Zealand, Australia, and other donors.
Yes, another aspect to this is that these realm countries, they are New Zealand citizens, but they're not treated equally. If they were New Zealand citizens living in the mainland, they would have access to better services, higher wages, so on and so on. The services provided to the realm countries has been criticised by some over the years for just not being as good as it should be, that New Zealand should have been lifting its game. Do you think that some of this push from the Cook Islands is because of factors like that?
I think that's part of the story, but I also think the Cook Islands, as with most Pacific Island countries now, are looking for really long-term sustainable development policies. And these interests, from their perspective, can only be served by maximizing the use of their natural resources. And this is why you see the Cook Islands look to open up this new frontier with deep-sea minerals. Obviously, we don't have the expertise to do this for the Cooks. If we did, we would have done it by now. China has the expertise and technology and infrastructure to do this, and hence the Cook Islands are really just putting 2 things together, long-term development aspirations with a partner that has the capacity to achieve that.
How do you think it's all going to break down in the end once New Zealand finds out what's in this deal, which we have to presume, given what Mark Brown has said, is not going to be anything terribly controversial? What will happen? Will it be a complete back down by Wellington? What do you think will happen?
Well, I think Wellington has to revise its assumptions. It always talks about them being part of the Pacific family, there being trust between them and the Pacific Island countries. Well, from the Pacific Island countries' perspective, they've always had really good relations with New Zealand. Of all the Western countries, New Zealand has been seen as the one most closest to the Pacific Island countries. So I think Wellington really has to kind of put a bit of substance behind this rhetoric of being part of the Pacific family and actually have some trust for what these countries are doing. Most of these countries do not want to cross any red lines in relation to security. And so they understand New Zealand and Australia's security interests. What they're looking for are just better development interests, to further the development interests, and they're not going to ruffle any feathers in Wellington, I think, at the end of all this. So I think Wellington really needs to just step back, not become so unhinged at the first step, and just apply what they've been saying over the last few years, that there is a partnership between them and the Pacific Island countries, there is this trust, and I think they need to get away from this sort of paternalistic mode of operandi in the Pacific.
8 teams will be licensed in August to compete in the new OFC Professional League. Oceania Football announced in Auckland on Tuesday they've opened the invitation to member associations to register teams for the region's first professional soccer league. The OFC says the new league is set to redefine the football landscape in the region, establishing a competitive and sustainable framework for elite football. Elias Atora with the story.
OFC General Secretary Frank Castillo said the OFC Pro League is a transformative moment for football in Oceania. He says the new league will turn the region's talented players into top professionals.
The professional league is the piece missing in football in Oceania. We are the only confederation without professional football. And we know that we've got a lot of talent. So we know that we've got talent. We just need now to get them and put them in a professional environment. And the professional league is the right structure. So they will do only football, and we will see football growing, getting better results, especially at the FIFA level.
OFC Pro League manager Stuart Lamont says the new league, to kick off next January, will follow a competition format that will keep fans and players engaged throughout the season.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very exciting time indeed. The proposed system that we're working from at the moment will have 8 clubs involved. They will play a double round robin, and that will be across 5 different locations, where the teams will basically have 10 days on site, playing 3 matches at a time, 10 days off, 10 days on.
Lamont says there will be an extensive checking system before the 8 teams are licensed.
But the full process will run until the end of June, and at that point in time everything will be processed internally, and there'll be a measurement system in terms of the quality of submissions, and based on that measurement system the final decision will be made by the Independent Club Licensing Committee and ratified by the Executive Committee by the end of August this year.
Secretary General Castillo says the best 8 teams will be in action during the league after the checking system, which has 41 criteria that needs to be met.
Still a long way, but we've got a lot of work to do, especially the clubs. And so they will express their interest in this professional league. Then you've got a selection process. So they have to do first a foundational level. Then if they tick all the boxes, then they can move in the club licensing. And it's a quite comprehensive process. They have 41 criteria fulfilled. And then after, we'll take the best of them.
The 8 teams will compete in 5 circuit series between January and May 2026 across various Pacific locations in a double round-robin format, culminating in a minimum of 17 matches per team. The competition will then split into 2 playoff groups, a leaders playoff group for the top 4 teams competing for semi-final berths, and the challengers playoff group, which will feature the bottom 4 teams vying for redemption. The top team from that bottom pool will earn a chance to face the 4th place leaders playoff team for semi-final spot. The semi-finals and the grand final will be a single-leg matches, ensuring every game is high stakes, with the winner crowned the inaugural OFC Professional League champion.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.